Mortal Kombat was disappointing, but I'd like to use it as a case study for the sort of troubles that beset adaptations of Mortal Kombat, video game movies, and even action and fantasy films in general. So I'm going to kill all those birds with one video in the most graphic way possible. Here are my scholarly thoughts on Mortal Kombat and why it's a challenge to adapt. So, when you think Mortal Kombat, do you see this? Or maybe you see this.
Get over here!
The 1995 adaptation by Paul W.S. Anderson. I've noticed a lot of critics comparing one MK movie to another, discussing why Annihilation is worse than the 95 movie, or perhaps comparing Asano Raiden to Lambert, or the quality of fight scenes, or lamenting the PG-13 rating of the 90s films. But this is a bit like comparing David Lynch's Dune to Denis Villeneuve's Dune. While this comparison is inevitable, it is also
fundamentally flawed.
Just as every adaptation of Dune should first and foremost be compared with the novel, the best comparison for a Mortal Kombat film should be the source material, the games. And if games brought this to mind? Well, this hasn't been Mortal Kombat for quite a long time. The latest Mortal Kombat game, as of this video, was Mortal Kombat 11, and it looked something like this. Times change, and if you're thinking it seems there's a lot of stuff the film did not make use of, welcome to the club. I'm just a casual fan, and I think it's pretty obvious, and it's nothing new either. There have been numerous adaptations of Mortal Kombat, way more than I was aware of before sitting down to make this essay, some live action and some animated. And there are a number of recurring tactics used in the adaptations that usually do more harm than good, resulting in products that are not only bad adaptations, but more importantly, are downright bad films. These two problems are so intertwined, I'm not sure how to begin. But before I do, let me just say that I really hate doing negative reviews, and there were good things about the new Mortal Kombat film. The actors were very good athletes, and a few seemed to know the games quite well, so no hating on them. There were some good moments when the line between horror and action was blurry, with Reptile and Sub-Zero, and Hiroyuki Sanada is an excellent choice to portray Scorpion. The production was overall very good, and the action even got me to wince a few times, which is what should happen when one sees Mortal Kombat. Sadly, all these strengths are just additions to the heap of wasted potential. Right. Flaws. When adapting any kind of material, whether a video game, an older film, a book, any alteration results in a butterfly effect, and the creation of a new protagonist in an established canon will obviously distract from its original characters as the script tries to tell its new story, and often winds up scrapping much of the lore in favor of its new protagonist. When this occurs, the filmmakers, instead of meeting the challenge of actually adapting the source material, write a completely different story. And the movie essentially becomes a stock plot wearing the mask of whatever franchise it's stuck inside of, instead of telling the story it's based on. Now, new characters aren't inherently bad, or even adjusting characters to some degree. Godzilla changes from film to film as he's interesting as a hero or a villain. Batman killing people doesn't ruin the 1989 Batman film, Spider-Man not having web shooters isn't a deal-breaker, and fighting games like Mortal Kombat thrive on new blood in the form of new playable characters. But for something like that to work, said changes have to actually be good. And here's the foremost problem with 2021's Mortal Kombat. Cole is the worst kind of addition. Created for this film, he just isn't a remarkable protagonist. He's generic and doesn't add anything a classic MK character couldn't have brought to the table. He crowds the role of Liu Kang, who is the chosen one of the games, leaving him not much of anything to do other than just be there. And because they gave Cole this basic story of unlocking his superpowers and redesigned the magic system of Mortal Kombat to accommodate it, everyone else gets sucked into this new internal logic, pushing them out of their places, while the whole idea of the marks creates the need for more exposition, bogging down what little plot is there as the film wastes valuable time that could have been spent fleshing out the characters and developing subplots. The games wisely explain a minimum of how things work, showing them when they are relevant and only telling when necessary. I think I know what the filmmakers were going for here. Instead of having a half-dozen fantasy and sci-fi elements flying around, they were looking for a single explanation for all the superpowers. It's a tactic a number of films have used when adapting comics, and one which theoretically simplifies a story or even makes it more believable, since a creator can use one explanation for a whole set of characters' abilities, such as Peter Parker not using web shooters in Spider-Man. That being said, not everything in fantasy and science fiction needs detailed explanation, and over-explaining can imply that the creator has very little faith in the product, or the audience's intelligence, or their willingness to be entertained, unless it's spelled with a big brush. Sure, knowing where Bruce Wayne's gadgets come from is neat, but a demonstration of what they do is more important than how they actually work.
Perhaps you should read the instructions first? Yeah.
But there's more. Because the logic of the markings is tailor-made to complement Cole's arc of wanting to protect his family throughout much of the film and being a
human punching bag,
it fits naturally with the gift of armor from his marking. But it's sadly nonsensical for everyone else, their powers not matching any exhibited character traits. There's also another problem with Cole. The film cannot disappoint the fans who came to see their favorite characters fight, meaning Cole can't succeed too much either, for fear of stealing anyone's thunder. Instead of defeating Sub-Zero, he needs to be saved, but still has to participate because he's the protagonist, so it's his movie. And at the same time, it isn't, as he can't come into his own. Ultimately, this new Mortal Kombat comes across as a film selling the idea of a franchise, more than the franchise itself. Just a stock action film wearing the mask of Mortal Kombat, and it tries to compensate for poor filmmaking with fan service that mostly goes unexplained, and is downright unexplainable due to the altered narrative. And key moments are completely undermined. For instance, the catchphrases from the game, like flawless victory or fatality, which would be self-evident in a tournament setting, make no sense by themselves when characters just randomly decide to say them. What is Goro's arcana exactly? Or is he an illegal combatant? Hanzo turns into fire when he dies. Why exactly? And how does he come back to life? Are we supposed to believe it's sheer willpower? Or did Cole set him free with the dagger somehow? Maybe he means free from revenge, but he just did that himself? It's not really clear. Why is Bi-Han immortal? And why is he suddenly wearing a ninja mask?
Get over here!
Oh boy, I hate to pick at such a classic line. Scorpion was killed in 1617, and there's no indication he speaks English, much less in a form as modern as "get over here." To put this in context, Shakespeare had just died a year before Hanzo, and English sounded very different back then. Even if he had learned English, it would make more sense for him to say, "Come you hither." Not only that, but if he can speak English, why does he address Cole in Japanese? These quotes and homages are used as a shortcut to connect with an audience who is already somewhat familiar with the franchise, but without a foundation or context, these moments are pointless. The characters, shallow caricatures of their better selves, and meaningless without the games to complement one's experience. And then there's basic plot holes like, why doesn't Raiden just teleport the bad guys away when they show up in clear violation of the rules of Mortal Kombat? He does it at the end. Why doesn't Shang Tsung just wait for the tournament? His fighters are clearly better, and there'd be no double teaming in the arena to compensate for that. Why is Jack still alive?
The ice, it cauterized his wounds.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not how cauterization works. And that fall looked pretty fatal. Why didn't Sub-Zero make sure? Isn't he an expert at killing chosen ones in this continuity? He seems to have been at it for 400 years. Never mind all that, why is Sonya alive? Why didn't Melina just kill her?
This is not the blood of the chosen one. Your death has no worth.
These guys are planning to ravage Earth, so why is she making a distinction between who has markings and who doesn't? No one else seems to care. I do appreciate how the problem of villains leaving heroes alive happens. It's tied to what I like to call the two-fight technique, or problem. Generally, creators need heroes to fight villains at least twice. The first fight is to show how cool the villain is and establish them as a credible threat, and the second encounter is for the hero to win with new skills, equipment, knowledge, etc. The reason this technique leads into problematic territory is because a valid reason needs to be established for how the hero survives the first encounter at all, and villain stupidity should never be it, because it undermines them as a threat, creating the exact opposite of the intended effect of establishing how dangerous they are, and this movie does it twice. Ironically though, the movie killed too many characters, mostly villains, as usual. The games are famous for their gore. However, fatalities have always been quite optional.
Kill him! Whoa, wait a second. I'm not gonna kill anyone. Very well. The tournament will resume at dawn.
And when it comes to the story modes, the latest games generally go light on the gore and death, saving both for when it can lend meaning or horror to the story. Of course, the games can do this more easily because the player gets all the gratuitous blood they want in the gameplay itself, leaving the story free from the need to gratify that need unless it happens to coincide with the plot's requirements. A movie doesn't really have this advantage. And the expectation for fatalities leads to an ongoing problem with the adaptations of relegating a set number of characters to being henchmen for the protagonists to kill in a cool way to show off a fatality, leading almost inevitably to wasted potential with every death when one remembers that basically every named character has loads of plot material thanks to the nature of fighting games. And it quickly becomes a disservice to what a Mortal Kombat story can be when characters are just killed in order to show a fatality. Although Scorpion's Revenge is probably the best adaptation and wisely remembers that killing is optional, Reptile and Baraka are given the job of hero fodder here. Although I think both sequences do work in and of themselves. Still, it's a bit of a shame. Just like in the 1995 film, where Scorpion and Sub-Zero are enemies like in the original story, but have no characterization because they're under Shang Tsung's control and are nothing more than some elite henchmen for Johnny and Liu to defeat. And so is Reptile. And I know someone out there is saying that they can all be brought back in a sequel, but that makes death cheap and meaningless, as if Scorpion's inexplicable resurrection didn't already do that. By comparison, the games have dealt quite a bit with resurrection, but they find ways to make it interesting and meaningful, such as heroes coming back as villains in MK10, blaming Raiden for their own tragic demise. Sure, technically, the characters are back and playable, but there's been major consequences. Even when Jax becomes free of corruption, the experience permanently impacted his character. Even back in the 90s, there was a lot more to Scorpion than just being a yellow ninja who says some catchy stuff and dies quickly. And even as a very casual fan who had only played Mortal Kombat 3, I could see the Anderson version was watered down. In his defense, when Paul W. S. Anderson made his version, there wasn't nearly as much to work with apart from the bits of info in the games and the prequel comics released simultaneously with them. And his movie does feature some characterization.
All those souls and you still don't have one of your own. I pity you, sorcerer.
Save your pity for the weak.
Surrender, it's over.
Hey, at least it feels like they were trying to have a story. Sort of. This doesn't excuse the movie's myriad flaws, of course, but at least they drew from what they had, and Anderson didn't just invent a bunch of new stuff. So the failings of his film are a little more forgivable.
But just a little.
But that argument doesn't hold for a filmmaker today. And even if you consider the plots of the games very convoluted, it's plain there's more than enough material to create a competent and meaningful story that would be loyal to the concept of the characters and setting, and wildly entertaining. Maybe that's the issue, that the source material has grown way beyond the kind of budget a studio seems to want to risk on a video game adaptation, when it's simply safer to cater to the idea that the 90s Mortal Kombat film is the measuring stick for the franchise. This is probably why Scorpion's Revenge could stay much truer to the lore, because the cost of an animated film can be so much lower than a motion picture. Having Scorpion's Revenge to compare to gives me an even bleaker opinion of this newest film. Despite what I said earlier, I mostly have praise for this one. Scorpion's Revenge is almost 30 minutes shorter than the 2021 film and manages to be a lot more faithful to the story and the gory aesthetic of the games, showing Hanzo's quest for vengeance alongside that of the heroes battling in the tournament, dishing out some gags while still being a serious take on the plot.
We all have choices. Live in the past or live for the future. You are a free man. It's time you start acting like it.
There are changes from the source material, but it works within context of itself. The story being focused on Scorpion means Liu Kang's role is downplayed, but he's still a heroic character, and there's nothing to prevent a faithful adaptation of his showdown with Shao Kahn at a later date. If we ever get a follow-up, that is. There's also this problem of filmmakers and critics not being able to take the source material seriously. Sure, the games get goofy too, but they know when to take it down a notch, even the earlier ones. Just compare Shao Kahn's voice from the original games to his film counterpart in Annihilation.
Don't make me laugh.
The earth was created in 6 days, so too shall it be destroyed!
The game version sounded calculated and intimidating. The movie one was overblown and silly. It's like the film is desperately trying to tell us this guy is dangerous instead of just showing it. Another frequent problem with action films in general, not just Mortal Kombat, where the goal of the filmmakers is to deliver action, is that human emotions like grief and fear seem to get in the way of the fun. At first it appeared this newest film wouldn't have this problem, but as it goes on, the characters just continually fall into cliché situations and solutions, seeming to get thinner with every passing minute. Early on, the murder of Hanzo's family sends him into grief and rage, and a one-liner
Done 6 tours, mother.
won't compensate for an opponent's superhuman prowess. But later, when Kung Lao is killed, Liu Kang's grief lasts all of 1 minute? And then he gives this one-liner.
Fatality for Kung Lao.
Just compare to how it went down in Mortal Kombat 9.
Kung Lao! No! I will strip the flesh from your bones!
Witness, boy. Do you know who I am?
The murderer of my friend.
Grandiose, but there's emotion on full display, as one would expect in such a situation. I'm not saying the story of the games is perfect. They do tend to get convoluted, and I'm occasionally confused about power levels, but they aim very high at elevating what filmmakers seem to think is just a dumb action franchise.
The fate of the world is being decided by some sort of karate tournament? Are you kidding me?
Who knows, maybe the studios are right. As if romance, family, and sacrifice could ever lead to compelling plots, or revenge, altruism, benevolence, or pride work as more than goals and be themes. I mean, it's not as if audiences can suspend their disbelief enough to accept a modern ninja clan, or view advanced cybernetics as anything but silly, or that familial struggles of royal families and political conflicts make for award-winning drama. Unless the writers in NetherRealm are seeing something artistic in this action fantasy that others seem to miss.
There's plenty of poetry right inside that ring, Think.
But when was the last time any work grew beyond its original form and target audience? Alright, that's enough sarcasm. My point is that these characters deserve better. The fans deserve better than some references and gore held together by a paper-thin, generic plot, and the average moviegoer deserves better, and when source material is this abundant, it shouldn't be hard.
This is so easy.
Who knows, maybe they'll blow my mind with a sequel, or someone out there with more artistic skill and love for the franchise will someday take on the challenge of adapting Mortal Kombat. On the other hand, why fixate on the film adaptations when we can already enjoy the best representation of the franchise? The games themselves. Anyway, as usual, this is just my opinion. Let me know yours in the comments and consider subscribing and all that good stuff. It really helps with the algorithm. And thanks for listening.